One of the major things that derails someone's progress, or actually just eliminates their progress, is the feeling of being hungry. Now, I want to just highlight that when you underfeed the body, which is what creates fat loss, we need to underfeed the body so that it will supplement by burning off our fat stores essentially. When we do that, let's say you burn 3,000 calories and then you eat 2,500 calories, your body is like, 500 calories are missing. And then it will send you hunger signaling in order to try and encourage your behaviors to replace what it feels like you're missing, that 500 calories. But if you do that, you won't lose any body fat. So hunger is a natural part of fat loss, and it's something that I actually think is a positive sign to a certain degree. For example, if you are not hungry at all, then in most cases you might not be losing as much body fat as you would like. Not in all cases, but in most cases you probably should be a little bit hungry, and that's actually just a sign you're doing something right. Now, obviously hunger, you don't want it to be too high, because hunger, whereas it can be a useful sign that you're on track and doing something right, you've set it up correctly, it's also an uncomfortable feeling. And if hunger gets too high, hunger signaling gets too aggressive, then you're likely to cheat on your diet. Okay, this might not be your fault in an immediate sense, but if you have set up your diet that you've restricted too much and you get too hungry, then you will, because you've got really deep-rooted evolutionary processes, survival mechanisms that will force your behaviors to eat. If you are hungry enough, you will eat, because we are animals that essentially prioritize survival, and the mechanisms that are deep-rooted within us promote that over chasing aesthetics. So we need to recognize that and understand that there's a certain level of restriction that we want to apply in order to achieve a result. But if we try and lose weight too quickly, which most people make that mistake, hunger will bite you in the ass. So now we've gotten that out of the way, we want to talk about how we can combat hunger. Now, my first piece of advice is don't set yourself up for the high chance of failure by restricting too much, as I've just acknowledged. But let's say you've set up a diet in which is fairly sensible. You've calculated that you're going to aim to burn about 3,000 calories a day. You're then going to eat back 2,500. In theory, 500 calorie deficit. Happy days. Generally recommended for most people. Not everybody, but for most people. Now, if we're in that situation and you're eating 2,500 calories and you are hungry and you don't like that feeling, then yes, we can acknowledge that some degree of hunger is always going to be present, and that's a good sign. But if you're a little bit more hungry than you would like, then altering the types of foods that you choose can go a really long way in order to promote your chance of sustaining the diet. So what I mean by this is there's certain foods out there that are just not that filling. And there's certain foods out there that are really filling. We all know this. And basically, your body will regulate its hunger signaling that it will send you based on mechanical and chemical information. Mechanical information being how much does the volume of food stretch your stomach, because the more volume of food you have in your stomach, the more it will send messages around the body in order to reduce the hunger signaling that your body essentially sends you. So if we can stretch out the stomach with more voluminous foods, that can go a really long way to suppressing hunger signaling. Now, on the other hand, we have chemical information where there's largely not much we can do about that. Chemical information is essentially when the food is broken down into the various different molecules and the things that float around in the body, then essentially your body will recognize the chemical information that it's receiving from many different sensory organs in the body, and it will regulate its hunger signaling based on what it's receiving. So the actual carbs, fats, and proteins in the food that we consume, your body kind of knows how much you've had. So it will regulate hunger signaling relative to that. But on the other hand, the mechanical information, how much we stretch the stomach, can go a long way to helping you out. And a good way to think about this is there's certain foods like jam and butter and peanut butter and honey and juice and, let's say, bagels and things that are very small in volume, very high in calories, and they're not really bad for you. Health is not the conversation here. They're just small in volume and they're quite dense of calories, and they don't particularly stretch your stomach out very much. So therefore, if all of your calories throughout the day are coming from foods that are very small in volume, what it's going to mean is you're probably going to be a little bit hungrier than you otherwise would be. Now, on the other hand, let's say all of your meats that you consume are lean meats, so they don't have additional calories from fats, it's just lean meat. If all of your fats are coming in are solid fats, things like avocados, for example, as opposed to peanut butter, it will stretch your stomach out more. If you're having plenty of fruits and vegetables, which are extremely low calories and very high in fiber as well, which is a whole other conversation, you're having so much volume for hardly any calories. Your carbohydrates are things like oats and potatoes and sweet potatoes, things that again are just really high in volume. If you're trying to select your foods based on the volume of the foods, it can do a really good way of essentially influencing the amount of mechanical information that your body is processing, and therefore regulating your hunger signaling in a very positive sense to aid you on your journey. You're going to be less hungry. So it's a good thing to consider. Now, what you might find is when you first start a fat loss diet, then you can choose whatever you want. And let's say you've got a lot of fat to lose. Typically, on average, this means that people are not as hungry. So even when you restrict them, you put them on a restrictive diet, which is what a calorie deficit is, by the way. I know that's a negative term, but that's just what it is. If you put them on a diet where you're restricting the chemical intake, essentially the calories and the nutrients that you're providing a body, when you put them on that diet, then in the beginning, if they've got a lot to lose, they might not be that hungry regardless of what foods they eat. But the more body fat you lose, you'll probably notice that your hunger goes up, because the leaner you get, the more your body realizes that the less body fat storage it has, and there's genuine considerations there about how the body communicates with itself and essentially feels malnourished when you lose all of the body fat on your body, or start to at least. This means that the leaner you get, the hungrier you get as well. So in the beginning, you might just rely on whatever foods you want, and you might not even have to pay this conversation any mind at all. But as the weeks go on, you get hungrier. Just remember that your food sources or your food selection can change to make it more voluminous, that the hungrier you get as you swim through a diet, the more you start to lean towards high volume foods that are going to be lower in calorie to help you out and make you feel full. So give it some thought. If you're thinking about setting up your own diet, then maybe just decide, how much of a hungry person am I? And if the answer is not very, do your thing. If you get hungrier along the line, consider the fact that you can make some changes, okay? Now, if you're somebody who has quite high hunger signaling on average, then you might want to set up some sort of a diet plan or some sort of a rotation of certain meals that are led towards being intended to be very voluminous but fairly low calorie. So, give it some thought. If you have any further questions, drop them in the group, and I hope this helps.